Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shameer Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today we are joined by Valentina Kristensen, Corporate Affairs Director at OakNorth. Valentina, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
For everyone listening to the show today, could you just share a bit about yourself and your journey so far?
I started my career at a communications agency called Lansons. From my teen years, I'd had an interest in kind of the role that comms plays in different things. My mum's an entrepreneur, and I'd seen her team doing PR, and I thought, wow, it's amazing. You can put out a press release, you can get coverage, and then you can have sales off the back of that without having to, spend any money, or maybe not as much money as you would on a big ad campaign. When I went to university, it was 2008, which obviously many people will know as not a great time for the economy. And I was doing business of all things. So basically just spent 3 years being told how when I graduated, I wouldn't be able to find a job. I think there were a number of things that kind of created a bit of a perfect storm with the financial crisis. So, 2008, you had, this huge distrust in traditional financial services. We obviously saw then in the aftermath a number of changes to regulation, and with the FSA becoming the FCA, a mandate within government to create more competition in the market, and that would inevitably lead to new players or challengers. Fintech as a concept wouldn't really be termed or coined for a few years, but there were definitely examples of fintech, and some of the sort of, I guess, the original gangsters in this space, businesses like Zopa and PayPal, which you could sort of classify as fintech today. And then, of course, you had the first smartphone in 2007, the first iPhone, I should say, and that sort of made its way into people's hands progressively over those next few years. So when I started university, almost no one in my class of hundreds of students had a smartphone. By the time I graduated, pretty much everybody did. So the proliferation of smartphone usage and the idea of doing your finances and your personal finances on the go. And obviously what that meant is that you were much closer to it all the time, right? You could go in and check, your bank balance, how your portfolio might be doing. You could even go in and look at your pension, all those kinds of things, which before would have involved you having to perhaps either go into a branch, call up your bank or the business in question, or go online, very different from being able to just do it on an app on your phone. So you had this kind of, this perfect storm, which meant that there was going to be a lot of disruption in the market. And I sort of thought it'll be a really interesting time. There'll either be traditional businesses that will need help rebuilding trust. There'll be new businesses coming into market that will need help building their narrative, and this is only going to get bigger because, smartphone usage and apps are only going to become more prolific. So that was kind of the combination of things that I watched over those years doing my degree. And then when I graduated, I went to a Chartered Institute of Public Relations, CIPR, Drinks and Links event, they called it at the time. I sort of went with my flatmate at the time because, they said free wine. We ended up chatting to some of the people who were there, and one of them talked about the grad scheme at Lansons. I then applied and got onto it. And my first client at Lansons that I was assigned was Metrobank, which was the first new bank in 150 years in the UK. And, at the time, their whole model was, and still is today, largely a bricks and mortar led business. So they have what they call shops or stores. It's a branch-based model. And obviously today, if you were to look at the challenger banking space, you would see that none of them have a bricks and mortar led model. So it just shows you kind of how much things have moved on since those days. The market's pretty much on a 180, right? And you don't have any that are branch based. So that though was really interesting because it sort of made me have my first foray into challengers and challenger brands. I was very fortunate at Lansons to get the opportunity to work on a really broad portfolio of customers, all the way through to, FTSE 100 blue chip companies, businesses like Vanguard and Barclays. But I think I really found that I liked the disruptor space. I found that that was definitely where I had the biggest interest. I had a very good few years at Lansons, got a number of promotions, and then I sort of felt like I wanted to get experience elsewhere. And I came across a boutique agency that was much smaller than Lansons, a fraction of the size, but where you could do, irrespective of how senior you were, you could, be very, very hands-on and almost sort of be the quasi head of comms within the companies that you were working for, because you'd have a very small portfolio. Then my first client assigned to me there was OakNorth. At the time, I remember meeting initially Rishi, and then later Joel, and sort of thinking, how have these guys managed to build a business that they had previously built, a business called Copal, which they founded in their late 20s in 2002. Over a period of 12 years, they scaled it to 3,000 people and sold it to Moody's Corporation in 2014, returning over 200 times for seed investors. And I remember thinking, how have these guys managed to be so successful and pretty much no one's written about them, and there's no pro about them anywhere that I could find. But, the mission really resonated with me, the idea of sort of building a bank for entrepreneurs, by entrepreneurs, and empowering those scaling businesses that have traditionally been overlooked and underserved by traditional financial services. As I said, my mum's an entrepreneur, and the mission just really resonated with me personally because I'd seen firsthand all the challenges she'd experienced with her commercial banking. And then I got the opportunity to do a secondment, and this was late 2015. So I started working with OakNorth in June 2015, which was a few months after it got its provisional banking license, but a few months before it got its full banking license and launched. In September 2015, it launched, and I was seconded. Just really found that the days when I was happiest were the days when I was getting off, and going to the OakNorth offices, getting off the tube and going to the OakNorth offices. I then had a bit of an epiphany. I spoke to a number of mentors and different people, and it's very interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in our conversation, but this idea of sort of knowing whose advice to listen to when. A lot of my mentors at the time, when I said to them, what do you think about me asking Rishi and Joel to hire me full time and let me come in and build the communications function from scratch? A lot of them were sort of like, you're way too young, you haven't had enough experience, they're a startup, they haven't got any, profits yet or any money, they only just got their license. Like, this is, you're going to leave an established business and, take a huge risk. And then I remember speaking to some of my friends, and they were saying, what have you got to lose? You're so young. Who cares what happens? And if you make a mistake and the business is a failure, well, so what? It's not like, you've got a mortgage to pay or kids to feed or anything like that. So I was at a point in my life where I could take very high risk with the hope of obviously high reward in the long term. And as I say, it was a business that really resonated with me, and I'd always had that leaning more towards disruptor brands. So it was a real fit in many ways. I remember asking for some time in Rishi and Joel's diary. They were very receptive to my pitch. Fortunately, I had a contract the next day and then joined full-time in 2016. The company in the UK was about, 35, 40 people at that point. Globally now we're over 700. So it's been a really amazing journey. And obviously we're almost, a completely different business today than we were at that point in terms of the scale today.
For those who possibly haven't heard of OakNorth, could you just give us the elevator pitch on OakNorth Bank, and I suppose also as well your role as corporate affairs director?
I guess you could say, we're the neobank or the challenger bank for business. We're the commercial challenger banks. As I said, we're founded by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, and this was really born out of the negative experience that they'd had in trying to secure a loan for their previous company and having a pretty abysmal experience. What we tried to offer is bespoke credit, so loans that start at £250,000 up to tens of millions of pounds, as well as banking services, so a current account, savings accounts, credit cards, etc., for high growth businesses or scaling businesses, so typically businesses with 1 million to 100 million turnover. That's where we feel the most prominent gap is in the market. If you look at financial services today, you've got a lot of players operating with the small micro businesses, the one-man band startups, and businesses, other challengers like Monzo and Starling, Revolut, Tide, they're playing in that space. Funding Circle, they're offering loans, smaller business loans and banking services for smaller and micro businesses. Then you've got, the the large corporate customers who are well served, businesses that might be looking to borrow hundreds of millions of pounds or billions of pounds. They're obviously well served by the big banks because the big banks will make a lot of money servicing them. The potential returns are obviously very high. And then you sort of end up with this missing middle. So that's where OakNorth plays. And to date, we've lent over £10 billion to businesses across the UK and across a variety of sectors, customers or brands that people might have been familiar with, that we've worked with, businesses like Leon, Brasserie Blanc, Deliciously Ella, Third Space. So really businesses across, a variety of sectors from hospitality and leisure, education, healthcare through to, real estate, logistics, manufacturing, and everything in between. It's a business that's also different to a lot of fintechs because from 11 months post-launch, we reached cash flow break even. We've been profitable every year since. So in 2023, we made 187.3 million pre-tax profit. So we are funding our growth now through the profits we make. We haven't done a primary funding round since February 2019. So a bit of an outlier in fintech in that regard.
Absolutely. And amazing as well. I think that naturally brings me on to sort of asking the questions around customer acquisition in that case then. Because obviously to get to profitability so quickly, I mean, what did your customer acquisition look like? What did that sort of mechanism look like? Because obviously you're not going after retail clients like Monzo, you're not advertising on Facebook. So it'd be great to kind of understand, that piece and how you managed to get that volume in.
Sure. So I know you asked previously about my role as corporate affairs director, and I guess that wasn't my role when I first started. It was really just coming in as a kind of a communications lead to help establish the press office and the communications function. This was, back in 2015 agency side, 2016 in-house, and we were a startup. We didn't have any money really. We wanted to bootstrap everything. We still have a very bootstrapping culture within the business. And I think the view was if we can offer an amazing experience to customers, we will end up getting that customer advocacy and they will create the deal flow for us, get originations that way. And fortunately, there was a hypothesis that was correct because even today, about 80% of our qualified deals come through unpaid customer referrals. So, we still today, it's a big part of that is customer advocacy. I think how we did that was wherever possible, we asked customers if we could do PR on the transactions with them, whether it was doing a press release, whether it was speaking at an event with them, whether it was hosting a dinner and having them, as a kind of a guest speaker. There were a whole range of different sort of tactics we used to create that deal flow. And we just basically would PR every deal we could. And I think, in those early years, the most we spent on any kind of traditional above the line type of marketing activities was about, 25, 26K a year. So it was, basically negligible. We only actually hired our first marketing director in October 2021. Up until 2.5 years ago, we didn't even have a marketing function. And I think then we sort of said, okay, we have reached a point now where we're pretty big and we are making some money. So what about turning on the marketing tap and seeing what that does? And I think, it's done a huge amount, not only in terms of increasing our deal flow, but also just bringing much more sort of structure and sophistication to the way that we manage our customer relationships and having, just basic things like a proper CRM system. I think you can be scrappy and bootstrap. And there's something very charming about that when you're a startup. But then once you reach a certain scale, there's an expectation, and a certain level of maturity that people want to see in the communications that they receive from you. So we really tried to kind of mature that as we've scaled. And then today, my role as corporate affairs director, it has internal and external comms, as well as other areas such as content, events, ESG, and our CSR commitments in the UK. And the team also works very closely with our regulatory and government affairs team.
I'm particularly curious as to, obviously making the hire in 2021. And you kind of said, it was about time that we brought in some from marketing, we're sort of further along our journey now. But what do you think the triggers were to make that decision that kind of led you and the senior management team to say, look, I think it's about time we brought somebody in?
Yeah, I think it was just really the workload was getting bigger. And it was sort of a view of, do we hire another communications person or traditional PR person? Do we go for an agency? Or do we hire someone with more of a traditional marketing background? And, I would say that the team, myself and my colleague Tom, had always done PR plus. So we'd always done PR plus other marketing activities, events or content creation. But, that wasn't our bread and butter. And I think, when we hired Hugo, who's our marketing director, we wanted someone who really had that experience of, the full marketing mix and who could come in and work with us. And I think that's really important. There's often in lots of companies, there's sort of this competition between communications or PR and marketing, and they're often competing for budget. And that's just not at all how we operate. We're very collaborative in what we do, and the work is very complementary. I mean, Hugo and I sit next to each other in the office. We join all of the syncs so that we know what the other team is doing, and I would say actually it's not even about the other team. It's really just one team. We operate as one team. We always know, okay, if there's an event happening, then perhaps, there's a write-up that can be done. And then that write-up can be shared on social, and that perhaps could be used as some kind of thought leadership for a report or for a targeted campaign specifically looking at those types of businesses. If there's a deal that we're going to do a press release on, then, we can publicize it obviously in relevant trades and when, or very relevant publications. And if and when they publish the news, we can then share that on social media. We can put that into our newsletter that can go out to customers. That can then in turn impact deal flow, and we can get, calls off the back of it. Those are deals we can reference when we speak at events. Those are customers we can perhaps do a joint webinar with, whatever it might be. So the fact is the work can be very complementary, and that can be very helpful for PR and comms leaders, because a lot of the work you do is often very intangible, right? I mean, you do have some places where it's very easy to measure the impact, right? If we do a press release on a deal and we get, I don't know, let's say 15 articles off the back of it, and then we get someone coming to the website saying, I want to, open an account with you or apply for a loan with you, then we ask them, where did you first hear about us? And they say, I read about you in the Times or the Telegraph or Restaurant Magazine or whatever it might be. Then that's a very clear indication that the lead was generated through PR and comms efforts. But there's a lot of other things that PR and comms does where you won't be able to put a clear value on it. It's valuable, but there's not a clear, tangible metric that you can use. This is one of the ways where working with marketing, you can put some numerical value next to some of the activities you're doing.
It's interesting you say that, because I think we obviously run various types of activity for clients and stuff. And occasionally, what we'll see is that we're running activities, say on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever it is. And, there'll be that conversation of, we're not seeing enough conversions. All of our conversions, are coming directly or organically via the website. And you kind of say, well, yeah, that's probably linked. People don't wake up one morning, with they don't suddenly wake up in a sweat thinking OakNorth.
No.
I must go onto OakNorth.com if that's who you are.
You're playing a role in the decision journey, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think as marketers or PR people, we're kind of under that umbrella. It can be quite frustrating when you kind of go, well, where do you think it's come from? And I think the other thing about sort of marketing for me is, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I see sort of PR and comms, it's cumulative in terms of what you're doing. Whenever you start sort of putting news out there or comments out there, or you're seen in the paper, or you do a bit of research, then you sort of publicize that. If you're doing it sort of at a regular cadence, the impact sort of multiplies, because obviously it takes multiple touch points for your customer to then resonate with that and act upon it. So there's kind of a couple of things that you kind of mentioned, and one thing I was really which I thought was really cool was just now, is that you've kind of taken one piece of content or one action, and then you've shown or demonstrated multiple ways in which way you can sort of repurpose that to get the most sort of bang for buck out of it. So you kind of sort of really stretching a single piece of content or a relationship or a bit of good news to its maximum value. But what I'm also interested in asking you is, in the earlier days, was there any sort of, I don't know what you call it, grassroots or guerrilla marketing tactics that you tested out and tried that perhaps worked or didn't work, or at least perhaps the seed to something a little bit bigger?
I wouldn't say that there were necessarily guerrilla marketing. I mean, like, I think, you see some brands that are fantastic at that, and I think about like, um, you know, examples in, the kind of the case studies everybody sort of brings up, but like, whether it's Specsavers or Pepsi and Coca-Cola, there are some amazing guerrilla marketing campaigns out there. I think, ours was just much simpler and really that, we were, as I say, bootstrapping and just being scrappy. I mean, it was things like if, we wanted to do a dinner with some customers, we could say, well, okay, we have space for 15 people. So rather than inviting 15 customers, why don't we invite 5 customers and ask them each to bring 2 great entrepreneurs or business leaders that they know? And then obviously you're getting the benefit of having 10 new potential customer links, but then they're also sat in a room with people who are, talking about hopefully how great the experience is of working with you. Obviously, you should absolutely still do things with existing customers because, it's really important to deepen those relationships, but I think you can find combinations, right? And so, it could be something like that. It could be that when we did a deal, we would draft LinkedIn posts for the customers to share from their LinkedIn. It's just it's really not rocket science. I think it's just, it's kind of having almost a checklist and saying, okay, if we've got a good piece of news, then what are all the different ways that we can leverage this, and then trying to, to kind of tick off every single one of them if you can. And what you'll find is that, the more you do it, the more customers who are happy to do it, the easier it is to get more customers to do it because, they see that others have done it and there's not been any issue. And it's all been, hopefully very positive.
Going back to the point of, getting a customer to bring in perhaps contacts that they know. We had an instance once where we put a testimonial live on our LinkedIn. And I had another one of my clients reach out to me who's friends with the other CMO and just messaged me saying, why haven't you put my one out yet?
Right.
And I was like, hey, it's going out next week. I'm I don't run the timetable here.
Great entrepreneurs and business people will know other great entrepreneurs and business people. So, they'll, you can tap into those networks, and also it can be very helpful because they can then make connections and do business with each other. And the benefit they have is that they know that they've all gone through the due diligence with OakNorth. We've given them the sort of tick box that this is a good business that we want to work with, which can be very reassuring when you're obviously, an SME. You need that reassurance that the business you're going to potentially engage in a multi-year partnership with is actually going to still be here in a few years' time, and that they've, will be able to withstand the economic challenges that, of course, many businesses are familiar with from the last 12, 18 months.
Yeah, you kind of said, it's quite sort of simple stuff, but I think sometimes, startups are guilty of massively overcomplicating, I think, marketing in general, perhaps being over ambitious as well at the same time. And I think you're, kind of speaking with you, it feels like what you've got right is that you've nailed down what worked quite quickly for you, and then you've done it well, and then you've done it consistently, and you've got maximum value out of it. And then you've also equally recognized when you need to kind of take that step up as well at the same time. One of the biggest things that we face is almost trying to, especially with the smaller sort of clients that kind of come in that early stage, that they've gone and got themselves a European license, the FCA license, and with an 18 grand budget, they want to be in every single country. And you're like, there's enough business in Bristol for you. You don't need to be in Netherlands and Poland. It's not going to help the situation. Let's get the basics right first.
That's really important because, again, a lot of businesses will spend a lot of money getting the brand out there, and then either they don't have the correct follow-up. So those customers come in and the experience is just not what they thought it was going to be based on the marketing that they had seen, or the product itself, right? There's not product market fit. I think where we sort of took the view was, we want to make sure that there's incredibly strong product market fit, and that what we're offering is a fantastic experience. And then hopefully that will lead to those customers going out and sort of shouting about us rather than shouting at us, which is typically what happens with a banking relationship. And then those customers will come through the door and hopefully have that great experience. And then in turn, they will go out and sort of talk about the experience. So that's sort of the way we've operated. And I think, you have to get the basics right. This is sort of, I guess, comms 101, right? You have to have a strong narrative. You have to, be really, really clear on what it is that you're your story is. You have to sort of keep repeating it enough times that in time it will get repeated back to you. If you're not all singing off the same hymn sheet and everybody's sort of describing the company in different ways and they're not all clear in terms of what the core offering is or who the core target market is, it just makes those, any marketing dollars spent and any, PR or communications efforts, just sort of futile.
The same hymn sheet is so important. I've got a group of friends that all work for a software and hardware reseller called Softcat. I absolutely hate going out for drinks with them anywhere near Marlow where the office is, because the worst thing that can happen is that they'll bump into other colleagues, and then if you don't work at Softcat, you're done for, because all they'll do is talk about Softcat stuff. And then part of that is that their values are so strong and they're all so well aligned that they've got kind of like these two sort of areas of pull. Those values allow them to pull in really, really good employees because they've got their existing employees as advocates of the brand. But they're often bringing in customers because they treat their customers the same way they treat their employees, and so there's just that natural sort of pull between both. It's a fantastic business. I want to switch streams slightly and just sort of talk about sort of the early day stuff that worked really, really well for you. Kind of want to talk about sort of post 2021 hire of your marketing director and kind of what your marketing looks like now. And then I suppose at the same time, understanding, what do you think the challenges were with trying to step up your marketing, and where are you expecting to take the marketing activity with OakNorth? Do you think you'll be, it's very topical at the moment. Monzo have just launched their new campaign. Do you see yourselves doing sort of out of home activity and on TV and all the rest of it? Or do you think it'll be something very different from that?
In terms of, what it looks like today, post sort of 2021, or post October 2021, I would just say it's much more sophisticated and much more mature. It's, as I say, it's everything from the way we put together a campaign, the follow-up that happens, everything is just much more seamless, much cleaner, much more sophisticated. We're using technology a lot more, so we use HubSpot, but I know, there's obviously several equivalent platforms that you can use. And that just makes everything so much easier because you can track and do follow-ups. You can put together campaigns. You can, add new content and new pages, to your website, etc., in just a much simpler, more sophisticated, cleaner way. In terms of, looking at the future of, our sort of Marcoms approach, we'll continue to build on what we do today. We'll continue to experiment and try new things. If it works, if we feel we've got the return on investment, then we'll double down and do even more of it. If we don't feel like we've got the return on investment, then we probably won't do it again. I think we absolutely want to experiment and try new things. Will we ever take up, a big TV ad? Never say never. I think the fact is, though, that obviously the market we're targeting is very different. We're not going after retail customers for the most part. I mean, we do have retail customers who save with us, and that helps to fund our lending. But we don't offer, retail current accounts, credit cards, personal loans, things like that. So the types of businesses we're targeting, as I said, are 1 million to 100 million turnover, typically positive EBITDA, high growth. So that's actually a very specific niche of customer. I mean, we did some research with the Social Market Foundation last year looking at scale-ups and their impact on the economy. And while, you constantly hear about SMEs representing 99% of all businesses and being the backbone of the economy, and of course they absolutely play a huge role, the vast majority of SMEs, small micro businesses that might be employing, maximum a handful of people, that might be turning over, a few 100,000 a year, that's not the kind of customer that we are focused on and where we feel that there's the greatest need. Those businesses with 1 million to 100 million turnover represent just 1% of SMEs in the UK, but represent 22% of all SME turnover, about $500 billion a year, and 8% of all SME employment. So they represent a very small portion, but have a very outsized impact. And that's really where we try to focus our efforts. So the broad brush campaigns, the sort of above the line, very high cost, high visibility campaigns probably won't ever be appropriate for us because we are trying to target a much more specific niche. So it takes a bit of time to find those right opportunities to make sure that the audience is the right fit, but then hopefully, you'll end up with, much higher quality leads rather than where it's a retail campaign or a retail customer. You can obviously afford to be, going on much bigger campaigns where you'll reach, potentially millions.
Yeah, of course, if you're targeting, retail customers, you have to go very, very sort of broad. You have to go very, very sort of top of the funnel because, in order to get sort of the economies of scale and bring down the acquisition cost. But conversely, obviously, in terms of what you're saying, that because of the target audience that you're going after, you have to be very, very specific. We kind of sort of touched upon it, but we didn't quite dig into it. How have you measured success for, I suppose, your communications, your PR, and kind of the activities that you've done to kind of get, OakNorth to where they are right now? What does that sort of, mix of KPIs look like for you?
If you think about the things that you're going to proactively PR, I guess you could put it into different buckets. So one is sort of corporate comms, and that would be, high level updates around the business, like your funding rounds, key and senior hires, annual results, that kind of thing. Then you've got more reactive comms, which might be, jumping on the news agenda. You might be reacting to something that's been announced in the autumn statement or the spring budget. You might be reacting to a new piece of legislation, or a new piece of research or report that's come out, and you're sort of jumping on the news agenda on that. Then you have the sort of more, I suppose, deal-specific PR, or I guess sales-specific PR, depending on what you're selling. And that's going to be more where you're talking about the deals that you've done and kind of more of case study-led PR. The fact is that no customer really cares about your reaction to the spring budget or the autumn statement for the most part. Like no one's, if your comment's included, it's going to be included alongside 3, 4, 5 other companies or other individuals reacting to that particular piece of news. So you'll be getting a couple of lines in an article where many others will be quoted. And the likelihood of a business saying, I saw your response and I thought that was really bang on the money, and therefore I want to come to you and, open an account with you or borrow money from you. Equally, a business probably doesn't care that much what your results are, how much profit you're making. I mean, they care to the extent that, okay, good, you're not going to go bust anytime soon. But apart from that, there's probably not much interest. They don't care about your latest board hire or the fact that you've raised, however many millions of pounds in a funding round. So that kind of leads you into the third and final bucket, which is that sort of case study, deals-led PR. That's what the customer ultimately cares about is, okay, who have you worked with? What have you done for them? Are you likely to do the same thing for me and get me the same kinds of positive results? That's for that particular audience. Totally appreciate that if you're talking about the regulators, investors, employees, they will care about your reaction to market news. They will care about funding rounds or key hires or your annual results. So those things, those corporate comms, reactive comms are still incredibly important because you're dealing with a lot of stakeholders. But you've then got to, as I say, in terms of measuring success, it's saying, okay, well, what are we trying to achieve? If the goal here is to increase our sales by X amount, then we probably need to over-index on that particular activity to get that result. And at OakNorth, we use objectives, key results, so OKRs, which we set at the beginning of the year, very high-level company ones. We look at those every quarter and we see how we're progressing against them. Each team then sets team-level OKRs, and each individual then sets individual level OKRs, so that everybody in the company knows why they're doing what they're doing, how that feeds into their broader team, and how that then feeds into the broader strategic objectives of the business. So no one's ever in a situation where they're like, I don't know what the point of my job is. I don't know what the point of this activity is. It should be that everybody knows exactly why they're doing something, because it's going to lead to this thing, which is going to lead to that thing, which is going to help us achieve this thing at the company level. And I think in terms of measuring success in the initial days before we had any kind of proper CRM, it was very anecdotal. It would rely on like going to the sales team and kind of getting their feedback and saying, okay, did that work? Was that a good event? What leads have you generated from it? What conversations have you had? The fact is that when months have gone by from that initial conversation, people forget. They forget where they initially started that conversation. They forget to update you. It becomes very hard to track it. So kind of bringing in that sophistication, and I totally appreciate that when you're a startup, you won't necessarily have tens of thousands of pounds to invest in a super sophisticated, CRM.
HubSpot give you 90% off, so you've got no excuse, I think, in the beginning. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
I think the point is that, but then you might also have someone who's got the experience of using HubSpot, right? You might not yet have the budget available to have someone in-house. You might only be able to afford agency support for a project every now and again. I would say that it's sort of just keeping, like everything in your business, right? I mean, if I look at our tech stack, we've refreshed it 3 times since we launched in 2015, completely refreshed it because the tech has evolved and new players have come to market, and there's just better technology and new technology out there. And we need to make sure that we're keeping it fresh across the entire business. And that applies, to your marketing and communications too. Not just sort of resting on your laurels and saying, well, this is how we've always done it, and this has historically worked for us, so we're just going to keep doing more of the same. I think you've got to try new things. And then very crucially, you've got to be able to look at what the impact has been for the business. And as I say, there will be some activities which just will be difficult to measure, like those corporate comms. They probably do influence perception, public perception. They probably do lead to some people applying for jobs with you. Those are things that will be more difficult to measure than the deal flow or the sales that come as a result of that, the communications and the marketing efforts that you do specifically for that.
I call those sort of bits and pieces sort of hygiene factors, but they're so important, even if your name is appearing alongside 5 other banks or financial institutions, the fact that it's appearing against, next to the other 5 raises your profile as an organization. So you're right, no one's going to come to you and go, I'm going to open up an account with you because I saw your opinion next to, JP Morgan. But they're going to go, well, okay, that OakNorth, okay, they're, are they playing in that arena, in that field? Okay. And then that next sort of case study that pops out with, was it Raspberry Blank that you mentioned? That's going to resonate with them. So I think it's, it's equally as important to get those sort of basic bits right and get those foundations right. And I think even things like sort of like comms and emails and making sure that there's a level of, professionalism of material that you're putting out there, especially in financial services, especially if you are a bank as well.
Yeah, and you've got to be, you've got to be true to, your tone of voice and the perception you're trying to build, right? If you look at Monzo's communications, there's loads of emojis and there's some slang because they're obviously speaking to an audience they're trying to attract. So it's going to be a younger demographic who are more likely to use emojis or that kind of slang. You look at a lot of their sort of social media and they'll be like, oh, that Friday feeling or, whatever it might be. And that won't be necessarily comms that you would traditionally expect from a bank or a financial services company. But I think that's the whole point. They're not trying to be traditional. I think we just try to do the same thing, right? And speak the language of those people that we're trying to resonate with. And that's, entrepreneurs, business leaders, founders, CEOs of scaling companies.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, I do want to go through a quick fire round, but before we do, what does the future hold for OakNorth? Are there any interesting or exciting projects or initiatives that are in the near future?
We are expanding to the US. So we've since 2015 operated in the UK, and last year in 2023 we did about $200 million of lending in the US in the latter part of the year. We want to materially build on that this year. We've applied for a US representative office. We're actively exploring M&A opportunities there. We really feel like there is a similar gap in the US market as there is in the UK, and that gap's only been widened by the collapse of several banks in the US over the last 15 months, notably Silicon Valley Bank, and we put in a bid in March 2023 for the UK arm of Silicon Valley Bank. We didn't win. We lost to HSBC, but we
did offer £1, right? So we
offered £100. So we offered 100 times more, and we didn't get it. But there we go.
Yeah,
but
who says it's not corrupt?
Yeah. That's very exciting. Then, as I said, earlier in our conversation, we had traditionally for the first several years of the business, we'd focused primarily on lending. The business model was simply, we get in deposits and then we lend out to businesses. And again, sort of in the last 12, 15 months with what's happened with interest rates going up materially. And also just, I think, from having traded now for several years, we've had so many customers who sort of say, borrowing from you is such a great experience, but then I have to go back to my clearing bank and it's just so painful. I wish you guys did all my banking. And you sort of hear that enough times, and then you see what's happening in the broader market, and you think there are so many businesses that are not getting any proper return on the money that they have because the big banks aren't passing on higher rates to them. They get so much more from their money. How can we help them make the most of their money? And I think, we then felt like, we had a responsibility, but also an opportunity to step up to the plate and broaden our offering. So we are in beta at the moment. We have primarily been working with existing customers. We have been onboarding some businesses that are not pre-existing customers, but primarily focusing on our existing customers. And then the aim is to obviously broaden that out and offer, our broader business banking products to scaling businesses. You can see that on our website. Something that I'm personally excited about that we've been working on as a team is our sector pulse. So basically across sort of a handful of sectors, every 6 months doing a sort of what's happened in the last 6 months and what is kind of our forecast for the next 6 months, and sharing some of the insights we've seen, whether that's from conversations with customers or whether it's from the data and analytics that we're getting through our credit and portfolio monitoring, and then being able to say, here are some of the interesting things that are happening in that sector, and here's our kind of outlook. And that's, great for thought leadership, for profile, for lead generation, good PR. So there's lots of benefits from it. And it's just putting to work data that we already have, that the team is already gathering and using for our general business day-to-day activity in terms of lending. It's actually then saying, well, how else can we use that data? Could we use it to support some marketing and PR activities? So we issued our first report earlier this week, and it's had a really, really positive reception. And we're now working on the next one, which will be focused on health and well-being and looking at businesses in that space. So that's something that I've been very excited about over the last few months.
Amazing. I was, while you were speaking, I won't lie, I jumped onto your website to have a look at the business banking opportunity. I think it's a big opportunity for an organisation to look after the that million to 100 million area.
Yeah.
We can talk about that off camera though. Cool. Well, look, before I let you go, let me take you to our quick fire round. What podcasts are you listening to right now, or you would recommend?
So Fintech Insider, I've listened to it for years. It comes from the team called 11FS. It's just really good kind of news podcast, which looks at some of the biggest headlines in fintech over the last week. And they also do a lot of episodes kind of delving deep into particular subjects, whether that's, open banking or GDPR or what have you. So I think it's really useful whether you're, a student at university looking to enter into this space when you graduate, or someone who's been in the industry since the industry was founded and you're just wanting to kind of keep abreast of what's happening. So that's something that I've listened to for years. Bloomberg Foundering is another podcast I really enjoy. They sort of pick a particular subject or individual, and then they basically do a sort of investigative report on that, something that Bloomberg is very, very good at. And, past ones have been with WeWork, the crypto queen, McAfee, so the cybersecurity company. So yeah, they're just really entertaining and really well put together, edited really amazingly. And you have sort of different members of the editorial team who take on each time. So yeah, I think those are great listening.
Amazing. And any books that you're currently reading or would recommend?
I'm actually currently rereading Lord of the Rings: Two Towers. Just it's not a business book. I've read many business books, and I have a whole kind of library full of them. But I like to alternate between sort of every now and again bringing in a fiction book. I just thought, I want to like kind of, I guess, think back to my my more childhood years, and I was feeling a bit nostalgic, and then just got reading it.
What's perhaps one thing I haven't asked you, but perhaps I should have?
I mean, I guess something is sort of the advice that you get, and I sort of touched on this a bit in the beginning when we first spoke about kind of knowing whose advice to listen to when. I think, mentors are incredibly, incredibly important. And I've been very fortunate to have, a handful of mentors who've supported me throughout my career. And those relationships have mostly happened organically. It's not like I necessarily went out to someone and said, will you be my mentor? Or that I was part of a formal program. But I think mentoring can be incredibly useful. But then it's just making sure that, you don't rely on that person's view as gold. I think, people are at different stages in their life. And, as I say, if I'd listened to my mentors, I probably wouldn't have taken the role at OakNorth. But I think it's really important. I was at a point in my life where I could take that level of risk. Would I do that today with, a 16-month-old and a mortgage, and the job security that I have here at OakNorth? I think it would be a much harder decision to leave all of that and join a startup. But if anything, it just gives me more respect for my colleagues who left their secure jobs to join OakNorth, back in 2015, many of whom are still with us today.
Amazing. Well, Valentina, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on the podcast today. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.